Ronia the Robber's Daughter, Chapter 12. Early next morning they went down to the river to see if they had caught any fish in the net. "Fish must be hauled in before the cuckoo calls," Ronia said. She skipped merrily down the path ahead of Berk. It was a narrow little path, winding steeply down the mountainside through a grove of young birches. Ronia could smell the scent of the fresh young birch leaves, the scent of spring, and it made her happy, so she skipped. Behind her came Berk, not yet quite awake. "If there are any fish to haul in, yes. I suppose you think the net will be full." "There are salmon in this river," said Ronia. "It would be odd if not a single one had popped into our net." "And it would be odd if you, my sister, didn't skip headfirst into the river." "This is my spring skipping," Ronia said. Berk laughed. "Spring skipping. Yes, this path was just made for it. Who do you think trod it down to begin with?" "Matt, perhaps," said Ronia. "When he was staying in the bear's cave. He likes salmon. He always has." Then she stopped. She did not want to think about what Matt liked or didn't like. She remembered what she had dreamed the night before, and she wanted to forget that too. But the thought kept on coming back, like the most stubborn gadfly, and would not leave her alone. Until she saw the salmon flapping and splashing in their net. It was a fine, big salmon, which would give them food for many days. And as Berk took it out of the net, he said delightedly, "Well, you're not going to die of hunger, sister mine, I promise you that." "Until the winter," said Ronia. But it was a long time until winter. What did she care about that now? She would have nothing more to do with any plaguing thoughts. They returned to the cave with the salmon hanging from a stick and a fallen birch dragging behind them. It was attached to their belts by the leather rope, and they toiled painfully up the path with it, like a pair of draft horses towing timber. They needed the wood, from which they planned to make bowls and other useful items. Berk had trimmed the birch, but the axe had skidded as he did it, and now he was bleeding from a wound in one foot. There was a trail of blood behind him on the path, but that did not bother him. "It's nothing to worry about. The wound has to bleed until it's finished." "Don't be so cocky," said Ronia. "A killer bear might come and follow your trail, wondering where there was more of that lovely blood." Berk laughed. "Then I'd show it to him with a spear in my hand." "Lovis," Ronia said thoughtfully, "usually puts on dried moss when there is bleeding. I think I'd better get ourselves a supply. Who knows when you're planning to cut yourself in the leg again?" And so she carried home a whole armload of moss from the forest and left it to dry in the sun. Berk gave her grilled salmon when she got home. And it was not the last time. For a long time they did nothing but eat salmon and work on their wooden bowls. Cutting into the wood was not difficult. They were successful with that, and they did not cut themselves. Soon they had 5 splendid blocks of wood just waiting to be hollowed out into bowls. That was the number they needed, they had decided. But by the 3rd day, Ronia was asking, "Berk, which do you think is worse, grilled salmon or blisters on your hands?" Berk said he could not answer because one was as bad as the other. "But I know one thing. We should have had some kind of chisel. With only a knife, this is sheer misery." But they had no other tools, and they took turns hacking and scratching until at last they had something resembling a bowl. "I'll never make any more of these in my life," said Berk. "Now, I'm just going to sharpen the knife one more time. Hand it over." "The knife?" Ronia said. "You've got it yourself." Berk shook his head. No, you had it last. Hand it over. I have no knife, said Ronia. Didn't you hear what I said? What have you done with it then? Ronia was getting angry. What have you done with it? You were the one who had it last. That's a lie, Burke said. In resentful silence, they hunted for the knife everywhere, inside the cave and outside on the platform, and in the cave again and outside again. But it was not there. Burke looked coldly at Ronia. I thought I told you that without the knife we can't manage in the woods. Then you should have taken better care of it, said Ronia. In any case, you're a mean devil, blaming other people when you yourself have caused the trouble. Burke turned pale with rage. I see. So you're back again, robber's daughter. You're your old self, I see. And I'm supposed to live with you. You needn't worry, Burke robber, said Ronia. You can live with your knife, if you can find it. She left him, tears of fury in her eyes. She would go off into the forest now to avoid him. She never wanted to see him again, to speak one more word to him. Burke watched her leave. That annoyed him even more, and he shouted after her, May the harpies take you! You'll be quite at home with them! He saw the moss lying there, making a mess. That had been Ronia's stupid idea, and in his anger he kicked it away. Under the moss lay the knife. Burke stared at it for a long time before he picked it up. They had searched through the moss so carefully. How could the knife be there now? And whose fault was it that it was there? The moss was Ronia's fault in any case. That much he knew. Anyway, she was unfair and stupid and unbearable. Otherwise, he would have rushed after her and told her that the knife had been found, but she might as well stay in the woods until she was tired and became reasonable again. He whetted the knife until it was sharp. Then he sat down holding it and felt how well it lay in his hand. It was a fine knife, and it was no longer missing. What was missing was his anger. It had left him while he was working with the knife. So he ought to be quite content now. After all, he had his knife. But Ronia had gone. Was that why he felt this odd gnawing in his chest? You can live with your knife. That was what she had said. Now he was getting angry again. Where would she live? Not that it had anything to do with him. She could go and chase herself wherever she liked. But if she did not come back, and quickly, she had better watch out for herself. She would find the bear's cave ruthlessly closed against her. He wished he could have let her know that, but he had no intention of running through the forest looking for her to tell her. She would be coming back soon enough, begging and pleading and wanting to come in, and then he would say, You should have come before. Now it's too late. He said it out loud to hear how it sounded, and he shivered. What a thing to say to someone who was supposed to be his sister. But it had been her own choice. He had not driven her out. He ate a little salmon while he waited. Salmon was marvelous the first 3 or 4 times you ate it, but now, after the 10th time, the fragments swelled in his mouth, and it was difficult to get them down. All the same, it was food. What did someone wandering in the woods eat? What was Ronia eating? There must be roots and green leaves, if she could find any. But that was not his business either. She could walk until she withered away, since that was obviously what she wanted, since she still had not come back. The hours passed. The place was oddly empty without Ronia. He could not think of anything to do when she was not there. And The gnawing in his chest was getting worse and worse. He watched the dusk move in over the river, and it reminded him of that time, long ago, when he had fought against the unearthly ones for Ronia. He had never talked to her about it afterward, and she probably did not know that she was a person who could be lured away by their powers. How unfair she had been to him that time. She had bitten his cheek, too, and he still had a little scar from the bite. But he had liked her anyway. Yes, even the first time he saw her, he'd liked her. Of course, she did not know that. He had not told her that either. And now it was too late. From now on, he was going to be living alone in the cave with his knife. How could she say something so cruel? He would gladly fling the knife in the river if only he could have Ronia back again. He knew that now. There was often a mist over the river in the evening. That was nothing to worry about. But who could be certain, he thought, that on this particular evening it might not rise and spread right through the woods? Then the unearthly ones might come out of their murky depths again. Who would protect Ronia against their wiles this time? Of course, it was no longer his business, but no matter how things stood, this could not go on any longer. He must go into the forest. He must find Ronia. He ran until he was breathless. He looked for her everywhere, on the paths and in the places where he thought she might be. He called her name until he was afraid of his own voice and afraid of attracting inquisitive, wicked harpies. "May the harpies take you," he had called after her. He remembered now with shame. Perhaps that was just what they had done, too, since she was nowhere to be found. Or what if she had gone back to Matt's fort? Perhaps she was now kneeling before Matt, begging and pleading to be allowed to come home and be his child again. She would never beg and plead to be allowed back into the bear's cave. No, it was Matt she longed for. He could see that now, although she had not wanted Burke to know. So now she was probably happy. Now she had someone to blame so that she could leave the bear's cave and the person who was supposed to be her brother. It was no use searching any longer. He was giving up now. He would have to go home to his cave and the loneliness there, no matter how bitter it might be. The spring evening was as beautiful as a miracle, but Burke did not notice. He did not smell the evening scents or hear the bird song. He did not see the grass and flowers on the ground. He could only feel the pain of his regret. Then, far away, he heard a horse neighing in deadly fear. He ran toward the sound and heard the screams grow more and more desperate as he approached. Then he saw the horse in a little glade among the pines. It was a mare, and she was bleeding heavily from an open wound in her flank. She was afraid of Burke, that was obvious, but she did not run away. She only neighed still more fearfully, as if asking for help and protection in her need. "Poor thing," said Burke. "Who has been treating you so badly?" At the same moment he saw Ronia. She came rushing toward them between the pines, her face wet with tears. "Did you see the bear?" she shouted. "Oh, Burke, he took her foal! He killed it!" She was weeping desperately, but Burke could feel only the wildest joy. Ronia was alive. The bear had not killed her, and neither Matt nor any harpies had taken her from him. What joy! But Ronia was standing beside the mare, looking at the blood running from her. She seemed to hear Levis's voice in her ear, and she knew what to do. She called to Burke, "Hurry! Get the moss! Otherwise she'll lose all her blood!" "But what about you? You can't stay here with a killer bear around." "Run!" shouted Ronia. "I must stay with the mare. She needs comfort and moss, but go quickly." And Burke ran. While he was gone, Ronia stood holding the mare's head between her hands. She murmured comforting words as best she could, and the mare stood still, as if listening. She was no longer neighing. Perhaps she no longer had the energy. From time to time, a violent shudder went through her body. It was a terrible wound that the bear had opened up. Poor mare! She had tried to protect her foal, but now he was dead. And perhaps she could feel the life dripping slowly and inevitably away from herself, too. It was twilight now. Night would soon fall, and this mare would never see another morning unless Burke got back before it was too late. But he came, his arms full of moss, and Ronia had never seen a more precious sight. She would tell him that sometime, but not now. Now they must hurry. They helped each other to press the moss into the wound and saw how quickly it was soaked with blood. Then they put on more moss and bound it fast with the leather ropes crisscrossing the mare's flank. She stood still, letting them work, as if she understood what they were doing. But from behind the nearest pine, a rump-hob stuck his head out unexpectedly, and he did not understand. "What for are they doing that?" he said darkly. But Ronia and Burke were glad to see him, because now they knew that the bear had gone. Bears and wolves shunned anything to do with the shadow folk. No rump-hobs or merk-trolls, no harpies or gray dwarfs had to fear beasts of prey. The first smell of the shadow folk was enough to send a bear shuffling silently off into the depths of the forest. "That foal, see," said the rump-hob. "Not any more. Finish. Not running at all." "We know that," Ronia said sadly. They stayed with the mare all night. It was a night of vigil and a night of cold, but it did them no harm. They sat side by side under a thick pine and talked of many things, but never of their quarrel. It was as if they had forgotten it. Ronia tried to tell Burke how she had seen the bear killing the foal, but stopped. It was too hard. "Those are the kinds of things that happen in Matt's wood and in every wood," said Burke. In the middle of the night they changed the moss on the wound. Then they slept for a time and woke up just as day was dawning. "Look, it's stopped bleeding," said Ronia. "The moss is dry." They began to walk home toward the cave, leading the mare as she could not be left alone. It was painful and difficult for her to walk, but she followed them willingly. "She can't climb the rocks even when she's well again," said Burke. "Where shall we put her?" Below the cave, hidden among pines and birches, rose the spring that gave them water. They led the mare to it. "Drink and you'll get new blood," Ronia said. The mare drank deep and long. Afterward, Burke tied her to a tree. "She can stay here until the wound has healed, and no bears will come here, I can promise you." Ronia stroked the mare. "Don't grieve so much," she said. "You'll have a new foal next year." Then she saw that milk was dripping from the mare's udder. "The little foal should have had that milk," said Ronia, "but you can give it to us instead." She got the wooden bowl from the cave. Its moment had come now, and she milked the mare until the bowl was full. It was a relief for the mare to have her tight udder emptied, and Burke was glad of the milk. "We have a domestic animal," he said, "and we must give her a name. What do you think she should be called?" Ronia did not have to think long. "I think she should be called Leah. Matt had a mare when he was little, and that was her name. And they agreed it was a good name for a mare which was not going to die. Leah would live. They could see that now. They cut grass and brought it to her, and she ate hungrily. Then they began to feel their own hunger. They must go back to the cave and get something to satisfy it. But Leah turned her head and watched them anxiously when they left her. "Don't be frightened," said Ronia. "We'll be back soon. And thank you for the milk you gave us." It was wonderful to be drinking milk again, fresh and cooled in the cold spring water. And they sat on the platform outside the cave and ate their bread and drank their milk and saw the sun rise for a new day. "It was a pity that the knife was lost," Ronia said. Then at last Berk took out the knife and placed it in her hand. "And it was a good thing that it came back again. It was only under the moss, waiting, while we were squabbling with each other." Ronia sat quietly for a long time, and then she said, "Do you know what I've been thinking? I've been thinking how easily everything can be ruined, quite unnecessarily. From now on, we are going to watch out for those unnecessary things," said Berk. "But do you know what I've been thinking? I've been thinking you are worth more than 1,000 knives." Ronia looked at him and laughed. "Now you certainly are as crazy as they come." That was what Lovis sometimes said to Matt.